Thank you very much. Thanks for the invitation to be here. I would like to thank Melissa and Elana especially for making this happen. We probably have close to a year in the cards to get us in this place at this time. So thank you very much. I also wish to thank my wife, Carol. There's things going on behind the scenes all the time that many of us are not aware of, and she's a person that's making things happen also. I'd like to thank all those folks that have been a part of the Nonprofit Institute over the last 20 years in many ways. And they are also the reason that we are here and that we know what we know today. Those people acted entirely from a volunteer standpoint, entirely. And then I also wish to thank you because you're here. And I appreciate and thank you for taking the time and the effort to spend your time here today with us, not just with me, with us. Often I'm only given an hour to work with. Oh, and that's just Jackson's side, right? You see that, Jackson? That'll happen apparently various times. And he's the man behind the curtain, literally. Often I'm only given an hour to speak, and I don't do too well in that. And I'm not a professional speaker by trade, but I am given a little bit more time here on this event between today and tomorrow. The questions I'll hold off until tomorrow when we get to that section. We'll be busy. We'll be very busy, I'm sure, by the time it goes along. So I can't do that without his help, Jackson's help. But I'll go ahead and get started. You may have seen that opening statement there. I will have slides here that I simply am not going to have time to go over in detail. That's going to happen a lot. I will try to relay what the essence of that slide is to quotations like that previous. Profit organization. There was a period of 10 years prior to that the work carried on, existed, and flourished basically before the nonprofit existed. We have a record, therefore, of 20 years now. A significant part of my life has been devoted. And this is the way I want to try and approach this. I've broken this up into 3 sections. What I'm calling the past and what I'm calling the present and what I'm calling the future. These things will all intermingle without any question. The past, in this case, is going to bring us up to about 3 years ago, 3 to 4 years ago. The present will cover this period from roughly the last 4 years until now, and the future will be hopefully what is to come regarding the nonprofit. Today, I anticipate and need to cover the first 2 segments, the past and the present. Tomorrow, I will handle the future segment. Okay, and here's where we need to get moving. I just won't have time for them all. But as I do my work, I think about a lot of things. Many things catch my attention. And I'm definitely a person that looks for patterns in the world, patterns of all kinds. And things strike me sometimes as being important, and they may not necessarily over the last 20 years of my life. Just this time and place. And this is an example of a couple of weeks. And we will be leading to and that what we the image of this country as we become there that is less than the reality, I suppose. There could be forms of I got to think more and more about this particular country, where I'm born. What if I was born in India? The question is you're dealing frequently.
Of the species on Earth disappear.
1, United States Air Force. United States Air Force, as it, I called it aerosol crimes at the time. I don't use the word chemtrails myself just because I need to act in court if I need to, and your terms have to be acceptable in a court of law. But nevertheless, pollution of the atmosphere, however you want to say it, okay? The United States Air Force, when posed with acting out upon their responsibility to what in that case? To enforce the safety, right? The safety and defense of our welfare. Their statement was, what do you mean, folks? This is a hoax. This is a hoax, what you're talking about. There's nobody with credibility that's saying anything here that has any worth. To me, that's wrong. I have a paper on the site called Air Force Lies to America. It was a strong thing for me to say at that time, but I used the word because it was an outright lie. I come from a military family, and like that hurt, actually. But I call it like it is, and that was an outright lie. Years after that lie, liaisoners out to uncover that information. Number 3, Centers for Disease Control. What's their crime? Centers for Disease Control was tasked with conducting a study on people that were sick in our world. They're sick from a particular condition, which we'll talk more about as we go along, but it's an unusual condition with unusual symptoms, especially affecting the skin, but not just the skin. But an unusual health condition had emerged to where it had garnered enough attention from the press and maybe governmental requests that the CDC puts themselves in a position of conducting a study to evaluate this situation. Look at their report. This is the crime to me. I read the report. And the report, this is me paraphrasing. You will have to read the report for yourself. I was looking for scientific data. See, I was already engaged in scientific acts. I already had information at this time of a scientific nature about what might be involved in this particular health condition. So certainly if they issue a report, I'm looking for what? I'm looking for corroboration. I'm looking for differences, right? I'm looking for patterns. What did their paper say to me when always a paper, almost in all cases, that will describe this in more detail. But I saw 2 things in that paper. One is, the people in this survey, the people that we're studying, it just looks like they have some, it looks like they have some drug problems and addiction problems and alcohol. They look like they're unstable people. That was the first thing I saw. And then the second thing they said, we have identified a protein. We're going to be talking about proteins quite a bit later on. But we have identified a protein. A protein is a really big deal to me, okay, as we will see. A protein will be the guts of what you're after. Okay, in the end, it will be the guts of what you're after. They said, we have found a protein. This means you have something that tells you about the biochemical nature of the very thing that you're looking at. And they say, we have it. So I looked at the paragraph following it, and I'm looking for something that describes the nature of this protein, right? I mean in detail at this point, because this is the guts. There was nothing. There was nothing about this, okay, about the actual, I wanted to see the darn, I was going to say damn, but I don't cuss, the darn molecular formula of the darn thing, okay? Proteomics, the most you can learn. I wanted to see that information. There was nothing in there about this, okay? The study was a sham. The study was a lie. The study did not do justice to the public. These are governmental agencies entrusted with your welfare, and by the way, you're paying for them, same as me. The last one, you notice I left a circle. This is where I have to be slightly more cautious, but not too cautious. But a year ago, I left a circle, and I just said, it looks like there's a 4th one coming, but I just can't really talk about it. And I want to talk about it a little bit more. There's still a minor issue of delicacy here, but I want to go a little bit further today. This is the U.S. Patent Office that's listed there. I'm going to read a statement to you here. It's all that I'm going to say, but it is what I'm going to say about this. What I can tell you is that this issue involves something that I have worked on very hard for the last 3 to 4 years in the public interest. And I will say to you that effort has been thwarted. That effort has been thwarted. The good news on this is that even though I tried very hard to do something and that was thwarted, my work never stopped. I have always maintained, let's say, a level of independence as well as persistence in my work. So the work has proceeded, but there is an obstacle, and here's the statement. And can everybody hear everything okay? And could you hear the video okay too? Was that all right? I can't tell from up here. Here's the statement. It is now appropriate to disclose that the fourth entity involves the following. A, B, C, and D. A, an abuse and a misappropriation of intellectual property developed by myself. This intellectual property to benefit of entities in the professional, health, and research fields. C, a patent application in my name on the issue of Morgellons has been released to the public, but it is essentially expired due to the above state of mire. 4, a claim has been made by certain parties mentioned above that the issue of Morgellons is delusional, as based upon peer-reviewed literature, and that laboratory evidence does not exist. Proper legal procedures with the protection of my interests in the intellectual property would have been and are required to refute these claims. Present tense, folks. The net effect is that the injustices here are inhibiting the access of the public to scientific knowledge and the benefits of significant health-related research that has taken place. The best hint that I can give the CI is what can be disclosed at this time. Okay, I can say no more at this point, but I want that on the record. I showed you the projects early understanding. We're dealing with a... Okay, so I'm only... whatever, I got to try and convey. And actually, when I look at those papers, two things. Number one, I still haven't retracted a single one of those. If I need to, I'm going to. I haven't retracted a single one of those papers. And the other thing is, when I look at those, it's sort of like, wow, that's important. And I look another one, I say, wow, that's important. And I do this to almost every paper I see, because it was important. Most of the papers have a period of several weeks to several months, sometimes even longer, of work that just went into that one page that you're reading or whatever it's going to be. So in my mind, I have this huge challenge because I'm seeing that graphic and I'm saying, what do I do today to try and convey to you with some justice the nature of that work? So this is what I've worked on. I've tried to, okay? And what I've tried to do in my mind, asking myself, how could you distill it? I've taken the 350 papers. In my mind, we won't make it, but in my mind, I've boiled it down to about 50 as being what I consider somewhat representative, okay? And then remember, every time I threw something away, I said, well, but that's important, right? But I have it down to 50, roughly, something like that. And then, within the 50, where I'm in red, I'm trying to pick those to give you a sense of what that era of work is like. And what I've done is I've arranged it somewhat chronologically, okay? And I have 4 sections. Let me see if I can show the slide so we know what the sections are and what I'm trying to do. And this is where the thrust of my time today is actually supposed to be now, is going over some representative papers chronologically that show us how we have evolved. And so the 4 stages are this first one about, hey, something's happening here, folks. That's this one. The second one is, looks like we've got some important dynamics taking place here in terms of things changing in the environment. And so you get into environmental testing and such, right? So that's the second one. And also, you might just notice the dates there. We started in 1999, and we're moving ourselves up in phases. And I look at the work, I'm seeing this progression and evolution. This is when you're saying, oh, more than a problem, we better get to work on it. And why did we need to get to work on it? because those that were tasked with doing their work did not do their work. It's the only reason. Only reason. Never in your right mind would you have a single individual like me taking on these kind of problems, or any individual for that matter, taking on the types of things we're talking about. But it was necessary. Okay, then you see a new element coming in. And by the way, these are not sharp lines. Okay, anything you're seeing, there's stuff that in 2013 goes back to 1999. But these are rough characterizations of eras of work. And you see biology coming into the picture. The title that we chose for this presentation, Geoengineering and Bioengineering, the Unmistakable Link, I actually used that title about, when was that, at least 6 to 7 years ago in a talk that I gave. And it's really interesting. I knew 6 or 7 years ago that title, it was time for that title. I'm not so sure the audience was ready for that title at this time, but I'm hoping that we're ready now because we need to be. And so biology was always in there, and that's what that presentation 6, 7 years ago was about. This is a summary of some of that era. And those are the three that we're trying to cover to get through the past segment. And then we'll move into present. So that should be getting us up to about 3 years ago. So here we go on this. So bear in mind, in my mind, I've got all these in my head. I've got to give you 2 or 3. Now, we've actually talked a little bit about, so I get to try to move faster over the one section there on the ground samples. But now let's start bringing in the papers. And this is where the work takes place, and always has taken place. And I get to figure out which one I'm on, and those are the papers. When we get to move through them, I'll do the best I can. The point would be to try to give you the essence of what each of the papers was about. This was where it started. I'll try to move. This is where it started. I have a history in Santa Fe. We lived here a good 15 years. We've been gone 4 or 5 years ago. My work formally started in Santa Fe on Valentine's Day in 1999. I really can't take your time, because we won't have it, to go through all the nuances and all that's going on when I show you these. I can't take the questions now either, but I'm hoping, I'm counting on your mind. Actually, I am counting on your intellect and your mind to help me understand. And I'm not trying to pass the buck, but you got to help me on this. And I could talk for a half hour on this. I could talk for an hour on this photograph. I won't be able to do it. But this picture is simple, but it started the whole affair. If you can imagine some fellow out there in 1999 just looking. I do have connections with this world, and the natural world is very important to me. And again, I do look for patterns, and when something doesn't fit, in this case, it didn't fit strongly enough that it compelled me to say, right, the internet was fairly new here, right? I'm a computer sort of nerd guy, so I'm saying I've got this tool that I can start, I've got to tell somebody about this. This was simply the first photograph. What's the point? The point is that the nature of the atmosphere was changed in a relatively short period of time, namely 20, 30 minutes, by a direct physical alteration of that environment that was not commensurate with the state of meteorology at the time and point. That's the issue. So the point was made, and the alarm is sounded in February of 1999. Okay, I know that some of you have seen this material, but for me to try to give this picture, composite picture, I want to show it because this is an important part of this perspective to me. It caught my interest the other day when I was looking at this. I thought it was a little bit later. But this happened only a few months after I put up that photograph. I thought it might have been a year or two later. This actually happened only a few months. And what happened here? What happened here, you have this guy starting to post some photographs of something unusual is going on. Me being a computer person, started to take an interest in, hey, is anybody listening to me? So I start looking at the data records of visitors to the site, and I start seeing a very interesting situation develop, okay? And this was within a few months of me starting to post photographs. And I go, whoa, wait a minute. Somebody has an interest in what I'm doing, but it's not CNN. And so can you read any of that in the back, or is it impossible to read? Okay, you can't read it, then I just go through a few of them, okay? The list, I think, is 140, something like this. It's only a snapshot. It's just a picture. It's not the whole story. But let's go with a few of them, okay? Lockheed Martin, Los Alamos National Laboratory, Allergan Pharmaceutical Corporation, Alliant Tech Systems, Raytheon Defense Systems, United States Defense Logistics Agency, Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, U.S. Naval Sea Systems Command. The point is that you could not ask for a more representative cross-section of what is well known as military industrial, as well as pharmaceutical, as well as media, as well as intelligence, as well as governmental complex. I guess I get to extend Eisenhower's domain a little bit, don't I? That's what this list is. Go through it quickly. Some things are interesting, right? Astrobiology. Take a look at that. Ames Research Center. Okay. There's a lot in here. Everything that I said. The legal side gets in here. The investigative criminal branches came in here with the military. Okay, point is made. Someone had a very strong interest in what this quiet little reserved formal government employee was saying was important, that I better be announcing this. That's what it tells you. Now, shortly after this was done, there's a story, and Kate has a show called The Backstory. There's always this backstory going on too, right? The backstory here is that while I'm uncovering this information, in a few months later, when I try again to continue, I can no longer get that information, okay? That information channel has been cut off. And it's been cut off by this new system that I've never seen before, right? And this system is basically, it's a firewall. It had a name, but it's a firewall that covered all branches of government and said, public doesn't get access to this information anymore. So I no longer could get this. But this is a glimpse into what was going on in the background that most of us wouldn't even have the slightest idea about. On we go. And here I'm moving through papers. Okay, I could show you a photograph of the actual sample. I'm sure we would see one at some point, but basically the anomalous material that I'm talking about was a very unusual filament material. We know of asbestos fibers. Asbestos fibers, most of us perceive as being a harm to our environmental health, right? Why? Because they're very small. They're about 2 microns or so in thickness, and they don't digest in your body. It's a mineral. So bad news for the body. So if you start saying, I see asbestos filaments in the air, I can't explain them, you expect some kind of sensible response, right? Okay, this material was of that character. It actually ends up being submicron, ultimately, in the size of it. So smaller it is, the deeper it gets into the lung. It's a white, we'll see it eventually, and some of you may have already seen it, but it's an unusual filament material, submicron in size, indigestible, and has very unusual behavior and characteristics. That's the general nature of it. So this is that part about sending it to the EPA, right? Records on there, the correspondence is all on there. Okay, now you're getting your first hint of why this title of this presentation is as it is. Notice the date on this paper. This is a 2000, you can't read it, but it's a 2000 on there. So the work starts in 1999, right? In 2000, I'm putting up a paper that says, you know, there's something really unusual going on, it looks like, biologically. It's not just this inert filament that's there. It looks like there's some biology involved in this. And this actually involved a health professional in Albuquerque that, let's just say, had some very high-end microscopy equipment. And this person invited me down, and the line from the person, which was by letter, not by phone or mail, the letter was, Clifford, there's some things that I'm able to see that you can't see. That's what happened here. I had my little Toys R Us $30 microscope at the time, and I was seeing things, but it was a Toys R Us $30 microscope, okay? And I saw things that were quite unusual already, enough to justify the transmission of that sample to the EPA. But another individual had some equipment, let's just say that it was above my calling. And this paper is a report on the session that we shared together. And now you are speaking of unusual biological materials, I use the word components, within the filament matrix. This is going on in 2000. Okay? When we're talking about this issue of geoengineering, folks, I'm sorry, I bust the balloon very quickly, but this geoengineering issue, it's not about the weather to me. It's about a whole lot more than the weather, and it's been that way to me since 2000. That's the thrust of it. That's all I can tell you. There was unusual biological material within the matrix of the unusual filament material that the EPA refused to identify. It only added to the complexity and concern for the public welfare that was already in place. And it escalated it at a rather dramatic level, I would say. This was a domain that many people were and still are very reluctant to engage in. When we are afraid of something, we have defenses in place that are very good at locking us out of that which we must confront. I told you my nature, as best I can see, is that I will confront. I may not want to, but I will confront. And I never had a problem. When I wanted to see, I wanted to learn everything. I always want to know what is going on. I do not like living in any state of ignorance whatsoever. None. I don't care what it is. It is our responsibility as human beings to pursue that truth no matter where it leads. This is a part of that truth. I'm telling you, it's a part of the truth that I have found in my work. I'm asking you to confront the truth that you find. Make the effort that you deem necessary. Okay, another dimension to the work comes into the picture. This is pretty serious stuff coming in fairly early in the game. This one was a lot of pretty rather amazing work in a lot of ways, I have to say, if you just look at it from the outside standpoint. Took place in those early years. And again, that work was done because of a response. There's a political aspect to this that I'm trying to point out in the beginning when I said there's a problem, social implications. The public was asking questions. They were seeking a redress of their grievances. They were asking the political agencies, the environmental agencies, the governmental agencies to do their work, saying, we have a problem here, help us. My work only came about because it wasn't being done. This is another whole aspect of the work. It comes into play in 2003. Now we're bringing electromagnetics into the picture. Okay? Start putting these things together. You remember the discipline set, right? We got 24 going through. You got 3 things popping up right now. Each of those could be several disciplines in themselves. You've got environmental science coming in, right? You have all the biological sciences. Now you have the physical and electromagnetic sciences coming into play. Okay? The whole idea of physics coming in here. And what happened here was that I asked a question. I asked a question because of what I thought was a legitimate question that was being asked. And issues about the HARP facility in Alaska were being asked by people. And they were saying, you know, I just wonder if there could be an effect from some kind of installation upon that, upon human state of health. And none of them to me had anything to hang their hat on. They were concerned, but I couldn't find any information that said, yeah, I've measured this or I've seen this and this is what it is. So I dig in. Now, this is not an easy thing to measure, and that's probably why it's not done very easily. But this involves what's called the ELF field. Electromagnetics will come into the story quite a bit over these next 2 days, I'm sure, especially with Elana's talk. But one aspect of this electromagnetic spectrum is what they call ELF. ELF stands for extremely low frequency waves. Now, a reason that ELF is extremely important for us to be aware of and to understand is that our bodies operate. That makes it louder on my mic. Our bodies perform and act primarily in the ELF spectrum. Your brain waves, you're thinking, you right now, we're engaging, right? Those are ELF waves that are making things happen, okay? Brain waves are in ELF category. If you find something that indicates, and when I say indicate, it meant that study was done over and over and over. I must have done that study 24 times, all different places, everywhere. High as I could go, most remote place I could go, try to get away from all interference of any kind. At least a couple dozen trials, completely independent trials, and it means they came up with something that was stable in the result. And when I say indicate, that was a polite way of saying, this is it, folks, okay? If you find that there is an anomalous presence of an ELF field in the environment, in what's called an ambient field in the environment, should you have concern? Yes. If you cannot identify it, yes, you should have concern because it operates where we operate. Now, why it was bothersome to me, especially bothered, and still is to this day. I do not have a single entity. I have one person that repeated the study up in Colorado, but I don't have a single, let's call it, environmental investigative reporter, media reporter that has ever investigated this topic that I know of. But here's what I found that I could not let go. You know about your power grid running at 60 hertz. This is a big one, right? 60 hertz is also low. It's on that 0 to 100, I think, will be the ELF range we'll see. But your power grid is in there. And this is a big source of interference, by the way, very hard to get away from. To get what I'm saying is hard to separate out. You know 60 hertz. You've heard of the Schumann resonance. Some of you have heard of the Schumann resonance, which is the resonant frequency of the Earth itself, and that's about 8 hertz. And you know what's fascinating? I get off on these tangents. I hope the time thing isn't going to be a big issue, but I get off on these left for the whole thing. Wow. All right. Maybe. Okay. But this is part of the understanding. The Schumann resonance, it's not just a number. It is so neat in a way. These things do have meaning. Schumann resonance is not just a number. The Schumann resonance has physical meaning, and it comes from the physical dimensions of the Earth is where the Schumann resonance comes from. We know that if you have an object, like I remember breaking the glasses with the water, and you sing. I can't sing that high. But you resonate, right? You resonate with that particular dimension, that particular structure, right? Okay, the Earth does it too. If you look at that thing about speed of light and lambda times the wavelength to speed of light, you solve that out, you're going to find it's the size of the Earth that matches that resonance. This is why it's that frequency, okay? And that's about 8 hertz. And the stories of that escalating and oscillating all over the place, they don't jive on my side. They vary by very small percentages. Okay, here's your problem. This is the biggest thing that I know of that I am assigned to and attached to is this physical Earth, right? It's the biggest thing. Remember I said it's dimension. So the smaller it is, the higher that frequency goes, right? The smaller it is, the higher the frequency. The bigger it is, the longer it is. So here I am on this physical Earth, and I have a number that I can even solve for analytically. It's 8 hertz. That's the Earth itself. And I come up, and this is what you don't know, that I probably haven't said it. My measurement comes up with a fundamental of 4 hertz. 4 hertz. Now, this is a problem to somebody like me because the Earth is this big, and the resonant frequency with this Earth, this dimension, is 8 hertz. And I come up with 4 hertz. It doesn't even fit the dimensions of the Earth. There's nothing bigger than the Earth that I can be on. So you must ask, where does it come from? What is the source of an ELF field that is at a frequency that is lower than that which is commensurate with the Earth itself? And this was my problem. And by what she did, I have to move. But this is fundamental to me. We have a lot of talk about 5G, and this is all important. Absolutely, it's all important. I'm just saying, I think there's another really important issue here that deserves some consideration. And by the way, you get looking into combinations of use of frequencies, and you look into a heart facility, and you will find ELF being combined with other energy to do what they call precipitation, meaning the causing of falling out of material. There's all kinds of dimensions to ELF, but off we go. I have about 10 minutes. Okay, I can skip this one in large part. Not that it's not important, not that it's not a whole story, but in terms of the point being made about unusual biological components, I made that point, so I won't make it here. This is an extraordinary situation, and if you look at the nature of these biological components that emerge, because this comes from a culturing situation. And that's an entirely different world, folks, when you get into the culturing environment. I have emphasized the importance of culturing in my mind from the very beginning of my work. It's not very interesting to most people, but culturing is where it's at in terms of making progress, because, many people dismiss the scientific method, but it has a place. It has a place. It's not the whole story. It has a place. And the place is some kind of controlled situation where you are creating the conditions that are reproducing or simulating that which was occurring. If you now look back at my mention of finding unusual biological components within what? Within a randomly acquired sample in the environment. Uncontrolled, right? Versus important biological things happening in a controlled environment, two very important sides of the coin, and the controlled environment, I will claim, is our primary means of making progress in the future on a situation. That was always a major goal of mine from the beginning. Okay, now you see a new word for the first time. Now I'm down 10 minutes. I might make it, sort of make it. Sort of. You see this new word there, right? Many of us know that word, some of us may not, but you have the emergence of a new word in the papers, and this is the very first paper that was written on this topic, and this came about in 2006. So we're talking, whatever is that? Is that 13 years ago? The first paper comes up. And this is where there was an issue that had developed. It had developed in the media, certainly had developed on the net, and the buzz that goes along with that. But it had reached the level of the media. We'd have to see when that CDC study was done, but things were happening a little bit in terms of people saying, hey, there's something going on that's unusual here. And then you had a media portrayal taking place along with that CDC, a media portrayal of, wow, we want to call this our best word, our most accurate, truthful word of what describes what's going on is these people are delusional. This is the path that was taken for this condition. A new health condition had emerged of extent and distribution significant enough that it made its way into the media as well as the governmental venues. All right, so we're talking about something that's making its presence, but it's being dismissed as being, it's all just in people's heads at the same time. Again, patterns not making sense. In fact, the reason that I got involved with this issue, was because of the conflict and the parallel in patterns between my study of environmental alterations of the atmosphere with those of people. And what prompted my response was, remember what the U.S. Air Force said? This is a hoax, this is nuts, man. Okay? And guess what? I saw these people saying they're sick. And guess what? They were saying, you're nuts, man. Okay? I didn't like it. I didn't like it one bit, because it doesn't jive. Never did. And this is why I got involved in this issue. I never knew where this was going, but it was not fair, it was not just to those people to call them nuts when you could produce a physical sample in your presence, okay, and say, hey, Mr. Doctor, here you go, you study this, I see it, do you see it? And to have that person written up as being nuts in their medical record and their career and their lives destroyed, which happened over and over and over, none of this is okay. So I had, a projector, help. Projector's going off, help. Oh, you almost made it. Okay, you saw the picture there a little bit, and you saw the title. So what happens here is that I get my first person. I have to have something that I can study honestly. It can't be just somebody talking. I finally made contact with an individual that we engaged in a dialogue, and she says, yes, I have these unusual symptoms. Yes, I have physical material. And I said, are you willing to document this? Are you willing to control the capture of this material? And will you be able to send it to me? We had the dialogue. She was the first person that satisfied my requirements of control over the sample material. That's what that paper is about. Okay, I'm going to take questions tomorrow, best I can, unless we stay after, whatever it is. After is okay. Okay, so here's what happens in that paper that's important. The public notion is that there's filaments involved. And they're nuts, and if it's anything, it's got to be hair, right? It sort of looks like a hair. This is what's going on. This is what, and everybody, and the whole world just accepts this in terms of, I say when something is wrong, we have to be out there. You make your mark. And I don't care how awkward it is, we make our mark. That was wrong. That was wrong. I had my first sample. I put it under the scope. Chris is a scope man. We were talking today. He's a scope man. He knows the value and importance of scopes. I put it under the scope. My scope was quite a bit better at that time. I had evolved out of the toy microscope. Had a decent scope. It was jury-rigged affair, but I got to a place I needed to be. And I put this filament under the scope. And what happens is, it's not just a filament. It's not just a filament. What's happening is, there's a whole lot of action inside that filament. There's things happening, folks. This is not any hair. And the observation was, there is significant and complex unknown biology taking place internally within this filament. Important observation, important claim. Claim is made in the paper, and the pictures are shown. And again, the microscope was fair, but it was adequate and sufficient to make the claim justifiably that we had another very important issue here, and this is just the control of the sample. But basically, the internals, and see, from the surface, it might just look like a hair. That's a hair for control. I believe in controls. That's a control of blood cells. But this is what's going on inside. That's not a hair, folks. That's not a hair, folks. I know the microscope isn't, 50,000 grand or whatever, but it's decent enough to show me. And I'll make the claim then, and I'd make it now. That's not a hair. And there are things happening there. And indeed, there's lots of things happening there. We don't know it all, but let's say I've spent a good part of my life studying it. On we go. Okay, another important claim. I've got to move through these. I'll say this. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to get through. I know we're squeezing it. If you can hold me to like 2 minutes each, I'll try to get through if nobody's going to kick me out on it. But here we go. Another extremely important claim being made. This claim being made in 2009. You have to understand, yes, I'm putting myself out there when I do this. I think very, very deeply before I put up a paper. I have to be able to stand on my own 2 feet. I am the odd man out. These are really serious claims that are already being made, and they're just stacking on top of each other. This is a huge one going on, because you got to picture how things are being treated. You're being treated. There's a few people here that have this unusual condition, and they're nuts. Okay, and if it's anything, folks, it's just hairs. And here I'm saying, we already know it's not a hair, folks. There's a whole lot going on. But of course, they're saying there's only a few people affected. And of course, we know nothing about how and why it's transmitted of any kind, if it was even real. But we don't accept that it's real, so therefore it's not even transmitted because it doesn't exist, right? Okay, in 2009, I studied this issue deeply enough to make the claim that the origin of this health condition did not appear to be an unusual exception that involved just a few people, but that this health condition originated from, in no way to disguise or be diplomatic, an environmental source. You can bet nobody wants to hear that phrase, but that is the phrase I chose because that is what the evidence showed. Environmental source meant that I'm taking samples at random from the environment. Now, what actually, I remember the business about culturing? Well, guess what? This one came from culturing, okay? What was involved here were culturing involving air filters. Basically, I'm reproducing the work from various environmental samples, and it has the same exact nature, at least at the microscopic level, with the person that provided the sample material to me. Hence, a claim is made. It's a claim. A person can try and refute a claim, but the claim was made. It's an extremely important claim, and it still stands up as being very controversial to some, and there are still major efforts in place to isolate that interpretation from a general understanding by the public. So I guess I'm saying we have our work cut out for us. That's what I'm trying to tell you as we go along. We have our work cut out for us. You can't count on me for all of it. You just can't. And every time I start talking about we, I'm talking about your children and their children and their children. We have our work cut out for us. On I go. Okay, now is where things are, let's say they're sort of expanding in terms of the biology, because the work is at the point where I'm saying we can see what the general nature of it at least is, at least visually, microscopically. We're in that world. We have culturing going on. We know we have a match between environmental and biological samples taking place. And so now I'm digging in to the actual, I'm trying to understand the nature. What is this? When I said biologically complex and active in the filament, right? What does that mean? And what that meant was, in my mind, I don't know if I can find at least a part of it. Hopefully that'll, okay. You can't see it well from there. And I have a pointer, maybe I'll remember to get it out next time. But I don't know, can you see little dots by any chance? Can some of you see a little dot there? Okay, I hope you can see that dot, because the dot's important. Give you a sense of scale. Your hair is about 60 to 100 microns thick. These little dots are about roughly in the neighborhood of a half of a micron thick. So that's what I'm able to get to with the microscope. The question that came up in my mind when it started My question is, what is the smallest identifiable structural unit within this filament that I see? This was my quest. I wanted the smallest thing. Remember, I knew I was limited by my technology. I still am. But I wanted the smallest because in my mind, that represents a very likely potential origin of biology. So I went after what to you I describe as a little dot. But that dot represents that essence and that origin of the biology that I'm speaking of. And this is a result of culturing work. And what's happening is I am trying to recreate that biology in a controlled environment. There are fascinating things going on here, folks. I do wish I had more time, but we try to get it to where it has some connection with you. And here's a point to be made. We're talking about an unusual filament structure, right? You can't even know what's going on there unless you're under the scope, a pretty decent darn scope. Regular scope doesn't cut it, okay? But it's a filament. But I want the smallest unit. The smallest unit I see is a little dot. So now you have this question of somehow you have a transition from a little dot, which we're going to actually assign in quotations to the bacterial world. It'll be qualified, but for now, for simplicity, let's call it in the bacterial world, okay? Something in that world to something of a filament nature. How do you get there? And this is what I was after. And this work, if we look at it closely, will, for the first time that I know of, show that growth. The papers are called growth progressions. It will show you the assemblage of those bacterial forms in a linear form, and you will find it constructing the filaments that I'm showing you here. And my presumption that that smallest identifiable unit is important still remains paramount to me. That I absolutely I don't believe, I think that unit is intrinsically at the very nature of everything that we're speaking of here. And everything that we're seeing beyond it is an extension or a product of that biology. My work would still say that's true. Next stage of evolution. It is pretty heavy stuff going on here because it's always I have no support network, ever. There's never a support network. There's not a single doctor that is coming out. I do see Jimmy McClure, by the way, and I will grant an exception in our audience alone, and I appreciate Jimmy for being here. But as a whole, what I'm trying to say is that the medical community would not, and please accept the exception, but as a whole, the medical community would not demonstrate the ethics of its profession by openly and honestly investigating the very nature of what is occurring, okay? And this is a real big one too. We will see that this is an evolving issue. When I say we have our work cut out for us, my work did progress to the point where I was able to successfully extract and isolate the DNA of this particular microorganism that I'm speaking of. It is no question, it's a very important accomplishment. That work was done in 2014 was the first time, okay? My facilities and such are not fancy. Is that my timer to tell me I have to leave? Oh, thanks. Yeah, I missed it, but anyway. That work was done in 2014. These are the obvious questions that you would answer. I'm not unique in sense of the questions that are being asked here. These are the obvious things you need and want to know, right? The problem is nobody's doing it. My facilities are not the kind of place where you think there's some advanced laboratory going on where I say, oh, I want DNA today. It takes me months of work to try and develop and learn the methods that I can come up with the evidence that I'm speaking of. This is paramount evidence of the existence of a microorganism that is at the basis of much of the studies that have evolved. You see that their history goes back to 2000, right? It's not 4 years ago or 3. The history goes all the way back to the beginning, and when we start speaking of geoengineering, we must, by my claim, immediately encompass bioengineering. And by the way, the engineering, what does it mean in my mind? Geoengineering Engineering is the desire of human beings to basically control their environment with the use of technology and systems, right? This is what engineering is. One of the definitions will include the business of cleverness, okay? That we design things and we create things, and we want to control that system ultimately. Design and control and develop systems to control that. Geoengineering means exactly that to me. Systems, designs to control. What does geo mean? Geo means earth, right? We're talking about systems to control the earth, not my storm. The storm is one part, a very minor part of the whole earth. Please extend your thinking immediately to consider bioengineering as simply the immediate, accessible, alternate domain for me to play with as a human being. Wow, there's biology here. There's the earth. I get to control my master strings and try to do what I want. I only have 2 left. Am I going to make it? Okay. What is my approach? My approach is to create a chain of evidence that I can submit. I hold my standards as being that of the courtroom. I've never been in a courtroom. I know lawyers are pretty good at tearing people apart, but I'd be willing to make my stand because my standards are those of science. I have to make an argument. I have to try and persuade you. I figure if I just talk to you and tell you, I could probably talk to someone else and get a story of some kind. I have to try and persuade you and convince you that there is a body of evidence that justifies and supports your responsibility and obligation to settle your mind on these issues and what you're going to do about it. So what's happening here is a chain of evidence. Those are my standards. Here was another one. These are definitely getting down to the guts of it. This section of the past, I'm trying to say that as a certain state of affairs 3-4 years ago, a significant body of evidence was in place. Another one of my standards would be that of repeatability. All of my papers, they're all there. I say if I needed to retract one, I will retract one. The conditions of those papers are identified. This was the paper that said, I showed you I said the little dot, right? Little dot I'm ascribing to a quote, for now, simplicity, call a bacterial form. Okay, I was there. I was after this. This is an isolation of the little dot in a controlled environment. Okay? This is the microbe that I'm speaking of that I regard at the origin of I will make the claim that I regard this, again, the actual term I use is cross-domain bacteria. That's a loaded phrase, and we'll talk about that more. But for simplicity of our discussion, just call it a microbe or something. I claim that this microbe that I have identified, isolated, and extracted DNA from is at the source of a health condition that has assumed the name Morgellons, and that its origin is that of an environmental nature. That's the first time I think I've made that claim so public and clear. And I suppose I'm supposed to shut up, right? And I am. I'm on the last paper, but I did get that claim in for the first time. And we'll let this go because this paper is now following again what are the growth patterns of this? How does it get to these various stages? And best I can say is it's quite complex. There's a numerous variety that appears to come into play. The word pleomorphism comes into play here. And that the conditions and media upon which the microbe is subjected to looks like it will affect it in significant ways in terms of its actual outcome. And by that same pattern, there remain numerous unknowns, very significant unknowns, as to where that actually leads, especially existing within a life form. And I know there's probably more, but I know it's over, and so that gets me through the past section today. And I thank you very much for your time, and I hope I'm okay in terms of time. Did I make it, sort of? Huh? I get to go to the next section? Here we go. Okay. I think this stuff gets pretty intense. I think regardless of what my stamina and desire is, I think we need like at least a 1 minute, couple minutes break. Not very long, but a minute or two break, just to whatever, stretch and maybe give me a chance to get the screen the next place. Why don't we take like 1 to 2 minutes of a break? Is that okay with everybody? But I'm a pretty punctual guy, so. Thank you. We're going into the present section now. I have not quite an hour, and I had 70 minutes allotted. So I'm down 15 minutes already, but I'm going to do the best I can again. We're going to be entering the present, what I'm calling the present segment. The present segment will be work that's characteristic over the last 3 to 4 years, roughly, versus the 17 years or so preceding it. Just as I had what I call three reference points at the beginning when I gave you those 3 slides on Cochise and Massix, I gave you 3 slides, right? Civilizations. I'm going to be doing the same thing here with three other reference points, what I call reference points. And I'm going to be doing that very, very soon. But before I do that, if you see, you may not be able to read it, but I have 2 little lines there that I need to go over before I give you those reference points. And the first one says, a side note on targeting. As I get older, I will need to be increasingly candid in terms of saying things that should be said. In my work, and I won't be an expose, I'm not that style, but I pretty much keep my personal life out of my work. Anything related to health and such, I don't talk about my personal state of affairs in my work. My work is acting, I regard my work as acting on behalf of the public, and this is where I come from. But as I get older, there will be a little bit more candidness about my personal life in ways that I think will be significant for us to understand what I would call that grand story that we have been immersed in for the last couple decades. And so I have this little note there, and this dates back to that conference in Phoenix 1 year ago, and Elana may have her own supporting substantiation of certain things that may have occurred. But I normally wouldn't talk about such things. But I am going to here at least mention. My goal is to get it on the record. I have a lot of things that I want to get on the record here because I'm not sure what my opportunities shall be in Tucson. Yeah, what did I say? Being Tucson, same state. I want certain things to be on the record. People have often asked me, especially in earlier years, they say, well, how come you're still alive? Or haven't you had anybody like assault you? And my answer has always been, well, I can't, the philosophical thing about why I'm alive, that's another one. That'll be for the second part. But have you ever been assaulted? And I would say, no, not physically assaulted. I could say, honestly, so, that very serious efforts were made to destroy my credibility as a person, to marginalize me, and to destroy my livelihood. I will say that. That did occur in earlier years, significantly. But did I have a physical assault? No. I simply want to put it on the record that pretty much immediately prior to the conference in Tucson a year ago, and maybe it's a fluke. Again, I'm not a person that just like goes out on a whim and says, maybe. What I'm saying is that immediately prior, mostly a week preceding the conference in Tucson, I experienced, let's say, a most unusual physical experience in my life. Something, again, I look for patterns, right? Something occurred that did not fit. The layman interpretation would, if I look at myself on the outside and I study what happened, the layman interpretation is, Clifford looks like he pretty much had a heart attack, okay? That would be my lay interpretation. I'm the only one that knows my body. I can't convince you of anything. I'm simply telling you in terms of my massive pattern analysis that's going on in my life all the time, even along with certain similar periods of minor episodes of even similar symptoms. I will bring that all into my consideration, and I do. I'm simply saying that I regard something that happened as being quite unusual with respect to my particular nature and biology, that I have to allow the consideration that there may have been some directed, let's say, effort in that particular event. And the part that's most curious about in terms of physical symptoms, I won't go into too much detail about it, but I do know how my body reacts. And this is an event that it went on over a week. It wasn't like a singular event. It preceded, we were out camping there outside of Moab. This went on for a week, and I experienced waves, okay? And these waves just gradually escalated. There might be hours in between them. They just gradually escalated, and it was always this crescendo that felt like it was building up. And I'm a person that always tries to stay centered, and I would do our little magic, hey, it's time to relax, folks, right? It's time to get centered, right? Something's happening here. And I would do that all the time. But I have to say, no matter what I did, I will still always throw in number 2 here when you can read it. But I would say no matter what I did, these waves always continued. And I can only say they escalated to a point over several days, 5 days' time, where I knew there was a moment that if I went down, I probably wasn't coming up. I guess is all I can say. It was call it close, okay? And again, this is not about my personal situation, but it is about what we need to do collectively and my responsibility to impart information to you so that hopefully you will assume that responsibility. Because one of the things I'm most certainly after is I truly want it to be such, it does not matter if I'm here, okay? And I'm not saying that in this deep, woeful sense. I'm saying I want your minds and your heads and your action and your spirit, everything in your life. I want it to be known what it is you want and need to do. And I don't need to be there because I'm doing my job the best I can. And my job is starting to have fallen into place to a fair extent. And this is where I will mention the statement, because this is just a plain, simple statement. I do regard myself as being fortunate to be here at this time. I have a very interesting life as I look back in terms, I thought it was an isolated situation, but as I look back, they have this thing about a cat with 9 lives, right? It's like, man, I've tripled the cat. There have been a lot of things that have happened that your existence or your non-existence are in the moment. And this is the answer. I'm not a person that, let's say, professes, again, I keep my personal side out of it. But this statement is true. And this statement reads, and there, but for the grace of God, go I. Okay? It's the only reason I'm here. And I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm just saying, this is the way it is. And guess what? It's not just me, folks. Guess what? It's every one of us. Every one of us is a part of that statement. So I don't assume anything. But I know that when I'm here, I know what I need to do. I think it's always been in my life. This is a part of what defines our nature. But in my case, I've known what I should do. And however awkward it might be, that I don't have the perfectly fluent presentation laid out, I know what I need to do. And this is our place today. Okay, 3 reference points. I told you that a protein was very important to me. It's true. It's incredibly true. Oh boy, if I had a single thing, DNA would help me out quite a bit, but if I have to pick a single thing, man, protein would really be at the heart of it. And we're actually not talking about a single protein. And it's taken me a while to really grasp the importance of this. But they have this saying in biology, they say, protein determines structure, structure determines function. There's this axiom in biology that says, and when I heard this, I hear it, it was like they're saying that, but did it really connect with me? No, it was this guy saying this thing in a lecture. But over time, as I've thought about it more and more and more, it's fascinating to me because they were talking about biology, I've extended this to everything. Like when my car breaks down, if I don't have exactly the right tool to get into exactly the right spot, I can't fix my car. The structure of things is how things happen. Everything is tied in terms of life in general with the shape and the size. You look at, I saw this guy talking about the advanced genetic work. They're doing the same thing, man. They're looking at how these genes are matching up. Okay, you've often heard about it with enzymes and this kind of thing, the lock model, where the shape and size, you have this magic thing that just only this way fits, okay? Well, proteins are at the heart of this. A protein is a biomolecule. We are made, all life is made of 4 things roughly. Conventional biology first, you get into other things later on. Conventional biology, carbohydrates, fats or lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. These are what make us up. A good part of us is the protein. I don't want to cite the number because I may be wrong, but I thought it was up at the 80% level, but I could be wrong. Don't take that one. But proteins, okay, you have a Chihuahua and you have a Great Dane. The difference is in the proteins. This is why they are what they are, okay? Proteins are what make things up. So when we start talking about microbiology, which I have become involved in out of necessity, leading towards this little dot, right? I know that even though it's a little bitty dot, it doesn't matter what it is. All life forms, if it's a life form, will be composed of these 4 things. So there was a time when I was interested in what's the smallest identifiable unit, right? Now I want the specific biomolecules that comprise that individual unit. Those 4 aspects, that's what I want. Proteins are the absolute heart of things in terms of, I'll give you, okay, up there, a couple examples. HIV, insulin, examples. Massive health consequences to proteins. Progress that has been made with HIV, this happens usually and largely often because of proteins. Proteins, they develop, they grow, they give us the structure. So if you can learn about that process, that method of growth, what happens? Remember I was talking about how it assembled in the line? If you can learn about that, and you can, let's say, interfere with it willfully. Let's say you want to say, hey, I don't want that line. I don't want that filament to form, right? Well, guess how you get there? You get there by an understanding of the evolution of the protein growth. So this happens in the world of things like HIV, and it's across the board. And this was an article in one of my magazines just a couple of months ago, and what's happening here, I've got some things to call attention to, but I got to move my pace. I'll try to point out things that I said were important when I was producing the slides. You see a phrase here, decades long. This is true. If you look into diseases, just study diseases, people want like this little silver bullet. They just say, oh man, give me this, and let's take care of it. That's not the reality. Diseases have histories of decades. I've already got 2 decades in this one. Nobody, let's say few people even acknowledge its existence. It's certainly not acknowledged formally, right? This health condition called Morgellons. I've already got decades going. What the heck on Alzheimer's? It's on the tip of our tongue every day, right? It's definitely decades long. And just now, this one came out a month or 2 ago. Just now, you're getting to the point where they're getting a test at the blood level for Alzheimer's. And guess what they're testing for? That they've learned to test for? The existence of certain proteins. Okay? I'm trying to give you a frame of reference. It's huge. It is absolutely huge. You have a decades-long health condition that's at the tip of our tongue, And we are just now evolving to the standpoint we have a means to detect the existence of certain specific proteins. It's always about specific. The proteins for that particular biology, okay? And they're able to test it in the blood. It's coming. Now, why is that so important? What's the big evolution there? The stuff is in your brain. And they couldn't test it in your brain. So we're walking around for decades deteriorating, and there's no really convenient way to get to it. So we all learn as we're dying that we've got something. Guess what? If you get to test it in your blood, I can poke your blood down there and I know what's happening. That's how important this stuff is in my mind in terms of what I'm talking about. I've got 3 of these. That's the first one. Second, I'm trying to make, let me see what my third was when I go back. You don't get to see it. Yes. I'm making 3 points about proteins as a frame of reference so that you understand when I'm saying, hey, I'm interested in this. I see some things about this protein. I want you to understand its context. Number 2, this is from a straight textbook. Textbook written in whatever. The textbook could have been 30 years old. I think it would have been the same. 2008. So what's the statement here? Listen to this one. Many diseases, including those of the heart, liver, and kidney, can be diagnosed by the presence of higher than normal concentrations of particular proteins in blood serum. Perfect, right? This is a textbook. It's telling you this is what's important. So if we're starting to talk about emerging health conditions or unusual health conditions, I'm saying go to where it's important. You remember what I was saying about the CDC and their failure? There is no justification for that failure. This is in a textbook. 3. Okay. This is where it gets interesting for the prospective future of this nonprofit organization, and also gets interesting with respect, you remember when I read to you about that 4th entity that had some complications with it involving lawyers, intellectual property? Remember I told you? And that I was attempting to act on the public's interest, but that effort has been thwarted for the time being. You remember when I was saying that? Well, this is one way of understanding how important this is and the stakes that can be at hand if we choose to get engaged, or we have others that might wish to engage themselves in a misappropriation of intellectual property. Does that make any sense what I'm saying? If somebody attempts to gain control over intellectual property that has huge ramifications for the general state of being, do we want to allow that to happen? And I said no, but I prayed for it with a price, so probably 3 to 4 years of time. But remember, the work never stopped, right? I always kept on my work. All right, here's a statement. Again, this is not about me. This is about the facts of the case, what we must understand. It's true. Serious money can be involved. For the people that think of money, I'm not a person that thinks of money as the prime directive, like in Star Trek. Money isn't money. But I understand its importance. Okay, so I'm going to read this out. And yes, serious money is involved here. And we'll talk about the future tomorrow maybe. These were my own notes. This was my own dealing with reality, if you see what I say, right? I said, it appears it will need to be in another lifetime. I don't know. I don't know where it's going. I know it needs to happen. I don't know where it's going to go, but I know what my job is. So here's the statement. Someday, you, as a gifted biochemist, will be in a position to possibly obtain a patent because you have isolated and characterized a new protein. Yes, one can obtain patents on biomolecules. I'll stop there. Well, no, I'll go down below. However, the knowledge of the structure and function of a protein, textbook, right? Knowledge of the structure and function of a protein can translate into a lot of money for someone, especially if the protein is important in human nutrition, disease, or in efficiency in agriculture. We are not talking about small events here. I don't know how the events will be managed in our future, but I know the importance of the events. And this is not trivial what we're speaking of. And I'm speaking here, but it truly is important for me to have this opportunity to speak, because again, I don't know how many times I will do it. I will do it if I see prospects for an understanding of that message. But this is where my head is at in terms of, I know what I need to do. I think I know how to help others become involved in doing what they need to do. And this is the role that I wish to assume in my future. I will not be able to solve it all. I've done some things. I know some things. But I guess another thing I have felt about my existence in my life is that of a catalyst. You know, I looked up my name one time. It's really fascinating. Names are fascinating, because I was adopted too, and my name went through a change, but my name's Clifford, right? So that when you look in the name Cliff, the name like apparently comes from somebody like they're on a cliff. They're looking ahead. They're looking over. And that's the way I see my life in a lot of ways, is that as a catalyst. I was always that way in the workplace. I wasn't always, let's say, the favorite supervisor, but I did what had to be done, basically. And this is what I'm trying to relay to you, that there's already enough known. This is what I feel I have accomplished, and we'll talk more about that. We're supposed to be talking about now. We know enough to know what needs to be done. And I will tell you without hesitation that every biomolecule that is identified, isolated, needs to absolutely be analyzed to the highest degree of capabilities that exist on this planet. And any protein, of which I have 3 that I have been involved with, every single one of them needs to be understood. And my catch is, they need to be understood now. Don't give me a 10-year thing. I want that information now because I needed it 10 years ago. I want that information. I want the structure and function of these proteins. I want to know everything about them because I know they're affecting you. On I go. Hopefully that wasn't too strong of a diatribe. But I'm going on now to try and get through some papers. Now's when I need to know what I have, because this is where we run through the papers again. Do I have a half hour roughly? Close? Not quite? I heard a yes. I heard a yes. Okay? So we get through these papers, and I have to show you the last slide, no matter what. But we're going through papers now. It's the same thing, 350. I boil down to a dozen. Out of the dozen, I pick 5 or so that I regard as hopefully being representative of the nature of the work. And the difference here is that we're dealing in the last 3 to 4 years. Now, what's happening here is I'm after that next level, the level that I can get to as a small, independent research scientist with, let's say, quite modest means relative to the requirements. But I'm after that information. I am trying to progress the research to the level that gives us a greater understanding. I know that I will never reach what I want, but I also know that enough has been reached. The paths are very clear about what needs to be done. All right, these will be, now, this paper actually proceeds. You probably can't see those well, but we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Out of the 8 papers, 2 of them are non-directly health-related and tie in more to the environmental side of the equation. Remember, you cannot separate these things. You may think I'm this guy that researches Morgellons. If you look at my work, you will find a good 10 years where it was pretty heavy duty on the physical alteration of the atmosphere and the planet from a geo sense, not just an atmospheric sense, from an earthly sense. Quite a bit of geophysics came in. There's a significant body of work, and for people to understand my work, they need to know that history because that's the basis of what brought us to where we are. I'm going to mention this paper. You can take it out of isolation, but you really shouldn't. It's part of that story of what's the real issue here. This is, so I'll try to get through it fairly quickly, but this is a paper that after a great deal of sort of turmoil, watching this shift, you know, and this has happened over and over and over, I see the public perception of an issue, and then I just look at the research, and I do the research, and I'll do it over and over and over, and I say, can I put my name on that? And I'll write it up. Even if it's in complete opposition to the entire interpretation of everyone, it wouldn't matter. I have to do what I know is true according to the nature of my work. This is a paper that finally said on a public level, I understand for whatever reason, actually for many known reasons, there is a perception that this geoengineering issue is about basically controlling the weather and the sun. Okay? This is a paper that says, sorry folks, doesn't jive. Okay? Doesn't jive. I'll make one simple demonstration of where that case comes from. You can read the paper. It's an interesting paper, I think. Of course, a lot of my papers. Some papers are not so much fun to read. Those that deal in the political or social side of life get a little bit interesting to me. But this paper examines sort of, to me, the sociological evolution of the perception of that issue versus what the data shows. And a basic conflict is if you follow those that advocate that we're dealing with, you know, trying to block the sun. If you look at where that came from with Edward Teller and a paper, he was a strong player in terms of writing a paper on that. If you look at where that's designed for, that's designed way up high. At the lowest spot, if you read his paper, the lowest spot he was talking about is the stratosphere. And you're not going to talk, he's talking about mid-stratosphere. That's the lowest spot he's talking about doing something. We're not in the stratosphere, folks. We're in what's called the troposphere. The troposphere is about 7 miles up, and then the stratosphere gets up there, you know, 60 miles, 100 miles. We're not in the stratosphere. But the lowest spot where you could actually have a significant physical alteration of that environment with respect to heat exchange is the stratosphere. And if you really look at what he's saying, I'd really much rather be up in outer space, like way out there in outer space too. It's called a Lagrangian point. You're talking about hundreds of thousands of miles away. This is where he really wants to be, okay? But he will say, if you want to fuss around in the Earth, you could try to work in the stratosphere. It doesn't work. Okay? It doesn't work in all kinds of ways. This is a paper that would contest the thesis that if you want to use this term geoengineering and say we're talking about controlling the weather or modifying the weather, I have 7 agendas that I regard as being implicit within the data that has shown up. Weather is one of the 7, and it's a part of one of the 7, and that one being environmental control. There's 7 of them. Another time we'll go through the other 6. Weather, yes, absolutely. Human beings want to control anything they get their fingers on. Anything from what I see. They just love it. What the heck can I control and manipulate, okay? And the weather is one of those things. Granted. Not enough is the message. Not enough. Okay, on we go. You know what? I'll give you the other, I'll give you the other sideline first before I try and get through an extension of the health issues. This is a paper that also took on what I would call a fundamental public perception of an issue. You know how the Morgellons thing, how I said they call people crazy and delusional? This is a perception that's planted. It's planted deeply. It's done with language. It's done with all kinds of strategies and techniques, okay? There's another one, and I know the origin of these from when they go way back. And the unusual anomalous filament that I'm talking to you about, you know what that was always? Oh, that's spider webs, okay? That's ballooning spiders, by the way. At all times of the year, you have these ballooning spiders that are coming out in mass and causing this certain phenomenon. I know the story, okay? It took time. I had to have the evidence in place. The evidence in this case required me patiently and slowly accruing physical samples from literally across the world. There's about 12 nations that are involved in this paper, and it took me years to get them. I had what's called the Environmental Filament Project, where they sent me the anomalous sample, and I just stacked them all up, and I watched that pile for years. When I finally got to a dozen and what I thought was a reasonable sample representation of the international situation, I did my work. And the work here is you go straight for the jugular, okay? Is it spider webs or not? Let's get it out in the open. And this paper puts it out in the open. And they are not spider webs, okay? So, see, I know how successful those strategies are of manipulating public perception of an issue. They're incredibly successful. I'll give you the answer and move on. The answer is it or isn't? What was his? You're right, my right too. Right, spider webs, control sample. Left, environmental sample. Here they are. Let's go to work. Okay, I'll go through them very quickly. What do? You put them under the scope. Chris is still here. Okay, he understands and likes the value of microscopes. You put them under the scope. You start with low power. Start easy. Low power. Can't really see too much difference here. And by the way, that's they're all labeled, but that's environmental, and then this is the spider web. So they're compared. Can't really see too much. And then they're on moderate power. Now in moderate power. And you know, that's the environmental, and there's the spider web. You know, they're starting to look a little bit different there, aren't they? Environmental's there, and spider, they're starting to look a little bit different. Enough to make a case already. But then if you get, and that's a spider web control. But then you look at the environmental filament at higher, pretty decent power here. And you have something happening. Remember I talked about internal structure? The pointer thing, it's not bright enough. Sorry, I don't wish. I have one, but you just have to look. In here, folks, it's action. The same thing I was showing you before. This is action. There's things happening in there. That's not spider webs. Spider webs aren't like that, folks. They don't have that type of activity. Okay? You are seeing now for the first time that the spider web guy is falling apart. And then there's your spider webs. That's your control. Sorry, folks, that's not that. They're not spider webs. I got to move on. Remember the parallel connection between the environmental filament and the biological filament, representative of the, quote, Morgellons health condition. Now we're going to go back through these papers, and I have 20 minutes. I think we'll be okay, because these are about that process of digging into those biomolecules the best I can to say, what can we learn about? Is there something that continues to pose a serious concern here regarding the existence, I could say human health, but I actually have to say affecting the life and biology of the planet is what we actually have to say. So here was a case. What was the objective of this? The objective of this paper was, I know that there were certain claims being made that, you know, whatever this condition is, it's called Morgellons, it's affecting a few people. We've already made it. It's a few people. They have these little hot spots in the country, and by the way, they're crazy. That's the perception, right? My question was, I'm receiving, we already had samples coming internationally on the environmental filament. Now I have samples, gradually, not as many, but samples come from the international scene. I have biological samples coming from the international scene, this one from France. This is a great photograph, by the way. The light happened to catch it. This makes the point that, and then you'll go through the I know it so well. This is it. It's the same thing every time. There's a lot of biology going on. The smallest subunit will always be there, and the internal filaments will always be there. You'll have that lineage that I'm talking about. This is that. This is that from France. It does take a pretty darn good scope to give you this information. The casual person would not see this. I'm up to about anywhere between 5,000 and 8,000 so on the scope, and that's one. It's not as good as the scopes that got enough money. You certainly match that, but it was very hard for me to get to that level. And there is a huge difference in your access to information between a scope running at 400 to 1,000, which you're going to find at your standard labs, and you get up in the range 5 to 10K. There's a huge difference of access to information, and the difference the difference is absolutely critical in terms of understanding the nature of what we're speaking of and also making the claims that I'm willing to make and to substantiate them. This is that. That matches the environmental filament under great study over many, many years. This does not match ballooning spiders. On we go. Okay, I'm going to work on proteins. This is me. Again, I have to be able to stand up. If you cross, I have to do my best to stand up to what I hold to be true, be willing to admit when you're wrong, and to make amends. That's what we have to do. I already made this huge diatribe on how important proteins are, right? I already went through that. So this is a continuation of my work and saying, okay, every protein is unique. Every protein is important. Let's learn what we can about this protein. I've told you it's going to be important to understand how it's affecting life of all planet on this earth, especially human beings if that's your primary interest. But you need to know. So this is a paper that will dig into the nitty-gritty of everything I could learn about these proteins with every method that I can develop or acquire within a relatively modest laboratory environment. I won't go through them all, but there's quite a bit of a list there, right? Lots of things going on, chromatography, infrared. I have some tools with me, pH, amino acids, electrochemical, precipitation, metal analysis. There's well over a dozen methods or more that were applied to this protein to say, these are the characteristics of this protein. This will uniquely establish the existence of this protein for you, and it will be your job to carry this work forward, and you will see what implications these aspects will have upon human health. And you can bet they are all going to have some aspect. Every single one of these is going to have some aspect. If you knew there was a significant metallic aspect to that protein, would that affect your perception of how important it would be? Every single one of those will be important. So, I don't go through the details, but this is a lot of work. Remember when I say there's weeks to months of work? There's weeks to months of work, easily, in the preparation of that list. I need that list to hold up, and I don't care who it is. I have folks from Carnegie Institution and UCLA, where I went to school, writing papers that are still saying, hey, folks, you're just all nuts. I have to stand up to them, and I will do my best. And I will contest anyone that says I'm nuts, and they get to do all of this work, and a whole lot of work. That's my first requirement. For you to play the game, you need to actually be aware of all the work that was done in all 350 papers, and you have to actually conduct all the tests and trials that were done in those papers, and you would have to refute them at a level significant enough to dismiss the body of work. A single exception would not even nearly be adequate. You would have to be able to dismiss the encompassing body of work. That is your requirement. Carnegie Institute and UCLA has not done that to my satisfaction in their recent study that they issued over this last year. And I'll take questions. What happened? Oh, thanks. Projector. So read the title, get the title, and we'll try to capture what we can. There, capture some of that. Okay? And 20 minutes. We're doing okay. I think we're actually going to make it today. It amazes me. Okay. There's four significant projects that have been developed in the Institute, along with the evolution of the work involving all of those disciplines over the years. Four projects, and we'll see those projects. They were shown at the beginning, and I think they're at the end. But one of these projects is what's called the Morgellons Research Project. And this was an effort to obtain unbiased survey information from the public at large regarding any symptoms that are being observed or experienced with this health condition. It was an open platform survey. It involves about 1,000 people. They do come across in the world. Obviously, the majority of them are from the U.S., but it was an honest effort. I'll say that much. This was an honest effort. And I think the work was done really quite fairly. It analyzed the major systems of the body, broke it up into about half a dozen major categories of systems in the body, and asked a series of questions, a lot of questions, actually. It took a real dedication for someone to get through this, and there was a short version and a long version, and I think the short version would probably take people, I don't know, at least hour at least, I suppose, and the long version was quite dedicated. And when I talk about untapped information, this is another. The data that is in this survey, it's just immense because people were given the opportunity also to give a literary addition to it and to write their experiences. We had a series of questions that feed through the database to give you this, but there is this tremendous body of information in the survey, and people don't have any sense of this yet. When we talk about the Community Health Professional Network I've tried to create, there's a massive body of evidence that has not even been considered yet. This is an excerpt of the top, most highest level summary view of that survey. I think it's literally like 1,500 to 1,800 pages of data are in that actual survey that was collected. And I get to thank and will thank our IT guy that actually he created that survey system. I would not have been able to keep up with any of this stuff. So he created the system to allow us to collect this massive amount of information that's there. But this is the highest level summary of what came out of that survey. And it simply says that from this pool of people that participated in the survey, these are statistically those symptoms that are of greatest significance within the body of questions, which involve hundreds of questions. This is what people regard as being of significance with respect to symptoms. Again, you can look for patterns, okay? You look for patterns of the people seeing a few delusional people in a hotspot in Texas or in San Diego or whatever, versus a unbiased representation of people from across the world. Put the pattern together, what do you see? I claim that this is evidence of the existence of a pattern of symptoms involving people that is completely compatible with the testimony and anecdotal information which has certainly emerged over the years. I don't know, can you read those in the back, or should I read a couple of them for you? I'm sorry, I don't understand. I'll read a few of them, okay? All right, so here we go. Symptoms. Materials or substances emerging from the skin. It means they said yes, okay? Open or slow healing lesions. It means they said yes. Rashes or other skin conditions. They said yes statistically in a statistically significant fashion. They said yes. Rashes or other skin conditions. Itchy scalp, change in the quality of vision, unusual and chronic ringing in the ears, unusual dental conditions, fatigue. Notice that 6 overlapping. Remember how I said there were 6 parts to the survey? That fatigue guy crossed 6 out of the 8 or whatever it was. It spanned almost all of them. Shortness of breath, persistent or excess mucus or sputum, stiffness in joints, constipation, bloating, unusual weight gain, anxiety, nervous. This is a set, right? I think the set is legitimate. I think the set is to be taken seriously by the medical profession, and that we're not allowed to play games anymore. That's what I think. This set here, I made this dedicated effort to get this pointer. I can't believe it. Like a good one. And I've never been able to use it. Hey, check this out, okay? This set, I got it. This is my fancy one I went for. Thanks, Elana. We're going to find, I just actually looked at this the other day. There's some things that I'm looking at over the last couple months or so. Again, the personal side comes into it a little bit. But this particular set in here, stiffness in joint, constipation, that's taken on even a heightened interest to me in some of the later research. And maybe I'm supposed to be getting it through it today, but I just don't know. No, it'll be on that last slide. It'll be on that last slide, 10 minutes. Okay, we got to move. I want to show you the last slide. I did this one. This was good. This is a global validation paper. This is about the spiderweb thing. Okay? Additional evidence. It takes me years to get to a point where I can make the claim. I may know about it for years and years, even decades. I may know of a claim that could be made, but for me to make it with my name attached to it, sometimes I have to wait. This is one of those. This is recent, December of last year. Here's a story. If I mention chronic persistent cough, unexplained, just sort of difficult to get rid of cough, I am suspecting, I could be wrong, but I'm suspecting that has meaning to some of us in this room. The existence of a chronic, low-level, persistent cough that just doesn't really go away. I could be wrong, but I suspect I'm right. We can always answer those questions legitimately if we need to. So, and I will say from a personal standpoint, I know that experience. This is like the spider web thing. This is a straightforward, man, this is at the heart of it too. And I may have suspected such a thing for a long, long time, but in December of 2018, I did something. There was an individual that had such a cough that I was aware of. Cough that was lasting longer than it should, had all the symptoms I'm talking about. I can go ahead on the personal side and tell you that's me now. In the past, I wouldn't tell you. But that individual happened to be me this time, because I do know that experience. What this means is I had access to a sample of mucus. I get sort of tired of that mucus over the years. And I have a decent scope now. That's the change I was talking to Chris about. I have a pretty decent scope now. And so I wanted to get that mucus under the scope this time. And so I did that. And so that's at 3,000x, 3,000 times, and that is my sputum. This is a part of that cough. Pardon me? That's fine. I think we're okay. We're close. I think it's okay. I'll just make sure I show you the last slide. So this is a sample of sputum correlating with a long, persistent, often low-level cough, unexplained, quote, flu-like syndromes that have been persistent in my research from the beginning, have a pretty strong association with the work, basically. Okay, so this is where some advancements have been made that I will be able to discuss to some degree, but not entirely, because that's part of my hope for tomorrow, because I have ambitions for this organization in the future. But what I will tell you, you know that I've spoken quite a bit about culturing. I will tell you that the culturing work has continued. I will tell you that the culturing work is at, I would regard as a fairly significant and advanced and stable nature at this point. This slide is such a culture of what we would call the environmental filament. Remember, the work shows a direct parallel between the environmental filament and the biological filament, right? So in a way, I can choose my weapon either way I want to, but I'll go with environmental here because that's what it is. That's the sputum, and that's the environmental culture. I would make the claim to you, based upon microscopic examination and a decent magnification, that they have the same general nature, if not specific. That'll be my claim. And that's, pardon me, Carol? Oh, okay. There we go. Okay, there you go. Okay, point will be the same. I have two. I do like to have multiple cases if I can. So those were different shades of it. So that's the sputum, and these are the culture. And if you look at these in great detail, if you look at those filaments, I will make the claim to you that they are essentially the same. You don't go getting things at 3,000 power of a filament nature that are symptomatic in the way they are and correlate with the research and distribution of that particular form in the environment.
Can you slide that down to the environmental and just hold still for a second?
You bet. This is where you will see this is, when I talked about the assemblage Yeah, you see the subunits? The subunits, stuff is very small here. A subunit here, what would be the best one? Oh, I could pick those. I could pick these right there. If you can see, these will be the subunits, okay? And the pattern will be, they will align themselves. The word called self-assembly. There's a fascinating video on self-assembly that they will align, and that filament structure will grow around it. Let's go another way. You're not supposed to have filament structures in your lungs. Let's just go another way. Okay, I don't care what you want to do. You're not supposed to have those in your lungs. And you want to explain a persistent chronic cough that won't go away. You start looking into an adhesive filament network that produces biofilm. It doesn't want to go anywhere. All right, on I go. Okay, I need to get through 2 slides here, and then a summary slide. And you'll see those 4 projects along the way, and you'll see another project that's a part of it, but let's hit these 2 and the last slide for sure. Okay, this is work. This work is all recent in my mind. This is, again, trying to advance things to the point of, we know it exists. That debate, for those that really wish to engage it, that debate actually is settled. We know it exists, and you don't get to play those games. Let's learn as much as we can until those that assume responsibility will do what is required. And so this is now another extension, and it's saying, I've told you that there's this protein that exists, and this protein will have effects upon all life in the end on this planet, but especially human health. And these are studies that were conducted and saying, this particular protein, if I were to apply it to a living organism of some kind, would it have any kind of effect that I could see? That's the question. This is as recent as, 2017. So here's a bean. So I grow beans. This is normal, folks. This is the way beans are supposed to look. These are little soup beans, and they're growing. Okay. Sorry, we have an unfortunate tale to tell here, and that is those beans, those plants, those life forms, when they are subjected to a rather mild dilution, there are soluble, one main divider in chemistry is soluble versus insoluble. The one of the 3 proteins I'm speaking of, this particular protein, is water soluble. Solubility is also extremely important in terms of what's going to happen in the body. This happens to be a water-soluble protein, so it's very well suited to these types of tests. I will tell you, it's a rather mild dilution. I think I have it at 0.5%. It's pretty mild, okay? But this is what happens to the bean, okay? The bean doesn't grow the way it's supposed to grow. I'm trying to improve my directness and simplicity in my presentation. I hope I'm getting better, but I know I have a long way to go. But that's the point. The bean does not grow the way it's supposed to grow. What does that do to you? This does a lot to me. What does it do to you? I can't imagine that we would just accept a piece of information that impacts the entire state of the world and regard it as a piece of information. The entire existence of all life on this planet is tied in with that result. And I thank you if you are willing to think. I know this is not the time and place where everything happens, but I hope as we go on that you will think about these things in the deepest sense. What do they mean, and what is your role in that picture? I know what my role is. Man, if I was a great public speaker, I'd be all over the place, okay? If I was a lawyer, man, would I be in that courtroom. I just happen to be this guy that does this work, and I'm doing my best I can. I've done some things that are in line with my existence on this planet. You all have this, and I'm calling upon you. Okay, another simple question. That was a plant, right? Plant world. Yeast, fungi, different primary kingdom. What happens to a yeast? That's a different ballgame there in terms of biology. It's in the fungal world. So control. Normal yeast. What happens when you conduct a culture of yeast? This is what it looks like. What happens when you subject it to a highly dilute solution of that particular protein? Well, here's what I see. I see mutation. I see what should be a single-celled organism undergo change to a joined organism. I see a mutation. Again, I can wax about the philosophy and what this means. I've done it because I know I'm running out of time. These things affect me in the deepest way imaginable. If I can demonstrate to you with a relatively simple procedure, it wasn't so simple to get the protein, that's a different story, but once it exists, if I can demonstrate to you with a relatively simple procedure that any plant thus far, or any organism thus far, subjected to this particular biomolecule is experiencing unusual effects, where do you go? I know where I go. I go here right now telling you I see this as a mutation. What does a mutation mean? You better start thinking DNA. Okay, I need to show you the last slide. I think if I get lucky here, we'll see the 4 projects. At least I can mention them. I get to actually skip this. It's important, but I get to skip it. These are things that I know that are in that protein. Bad news. I'll go through them very quickly. Everything says that you have this. Everything says that you have major impact upon the thyroid that's going to take place in 2 different ways. Thyroid is huge here. Very strong acid, no way that it should be there. A compound that has applications within the binding of particular segments of DNA. The compound is used, can be used to bind certain strings of DNA together. There is a compound that is more than suggestive. Well, it is polymeric, but more than suggestive of called the world of plastics that we know of. There are significant impacts upon iron in the body, and that means respiration. And in one of my textbooks, it had the grand line, respiration is a source of all energy in the body. And I looked at that and I said, wow, you can't get any bigger than that one. And guess what respiration needs? It needs oxygen and it needs iron in the right mode. And I'm telling you there's problems. I will also tell you, this is where the personal side comes in, but I know that there are very serious, directly observable physical toxicity responses from that protein in the human body. Okay. Oh, there is some good news. I'm not, like I say, I'm not all down. I'm really not. I'm one of the most, life is so incredibly exciting to me, folks. Believe me, it is. This is a grand place, grand as you could possibly imagine. This is another side. You can't read it. I'm just telling you, I wrote a paper here. This paper has years of work behind it. I don't know too many people actually read the paper and really do what it says. But this is me trying to say, you know, we have these things happening to the body. And honestly, it's just this full frontal assault. It's like every possible way you can imagine the body being assaulted. Oh, man, yes, I'm sorry. It's being assaulted. Sorry. But Clifford doesn't give up. And this was a paper that says, you know, given that state of affairs, I'm a human being. And so I can't bring up the paper there. This is just a slide. This is a paper that has years in the making, and it has a focus, or in that last 2017, it has a focus of several months that says, if we study, if we learn, we don't just talk, we learn. I think there's some things we can do about this. And it's not a matter of I think, you study, and this is not my development of the methods. This is my research of people saying, hey, if you've got thyroid issues, these are some things you can be looking at to try and help you. I will tell you that I'm a person that definitely advocates, call it more and more as my work has gone, I advocate the nutritional approach to health. I'm not a drug guy. I'm just not. I'm just not after that, and that's the whole thing. We all sort of have our opinion on it. But I believe, and when I said respiration is the source of all energy, well, nutrition is a part of that picture. As flawed and if I'm 5 pounds overweight or whatever, nevertheless, it was nutrition that made me, okay? It's the greatest thing. This is a pathway in my book towards health, and this paper is about nutritional forms that I think can be of value to you, and they are specifically mentioned in response to a particular malady that is likely to be a part of that assault. It's my attempt to help you. If you read that paper, you'll see it ties into that paper that took a year plus to write. That's 125 pages. That was before I even had some instrumentation, but it's all tied together. There is a very composite picture here that is internally compatible across that spectrum. When I talked about looking for patterns of data, it all fits. I have times where I wrote that paper like many years ago on things that I'm seeing health-wise, and I'm looking at molecular structure all the time. I have come to times where years later I'll do work completely independent, and I come to a set of results, and then I'll do the usual thing of saying, oh, well, I know this now, let's run a search and see what the best match to that is, right? And I'll run the search on my own work, and guess what shows up in the search as being the most likely candidate of something? And I'm like, I don't even know that I had those results is what I'm saying. It's so long ago. And the search will come up, hey, this work says that it matches with this. This has happened numerous times. The work is very consistent internally in terms of the picture that has emerged with respect to our health. It is complicated as could be, but this is a list of a couple dozen things that I think can have some bearing on that. There are others that can push it a lot further, but I told you that I consider myself fortunate to be here. And she's going to cut me off soon. I get to show the last slide. But I consider a part of the reason why I'm here is also tied in with my research. I'll say that from an anecdotal standpoint. Okay, I get to show the last slide. She's cutting me off. Those are the 4 projects. You can just register them. Environmental Filament Project, Morgellons Research Project, Community Health Professional Network. I'd like to talk about that more tomorrow. And Legacy Project, and that will tie in with tomorrow too. But those are the 4 sort of dedicated projects. This is another need. There are needs. We'll talk about those tomorrow too. But I wanted you to see this slide because this is my summary. And I have plans right now tomorrow to show this at the beginning to try and regroup because this is my consolidation of the work as I see it at this stage of affair, which binds together that past segment that I told you about 13, 14 years, tying in with the 3 years, where the last 3 years have had a pretty aggressive advancement in certain things that have happened and certain knowledge, but I know it's still just a stepping stone. I'm going to read these very quickly because to me they represent, when I said we know certain things and it's known what we need to do, this is that list of what I would claim is known. 1, DNA extracted on multiple occasions. Methods are improved and efficient. Specialized DNA testing prospects in negotiation, audit and legal issues ahead. That's a loaded issue. Just because you have something isolated doesn't mean you're necessarily going to be able to get the support in getting an honest answer of what that is. Another story. But negotiation would be the operative word there. Important and fundamental biomolecules now isolated. 3 different types of proteins, 1 form of lipid, and the DNA. Preliminary analysis of 1 of 3 proteins is in place via a couple of methods there. Dramatically improved and new culturing techniques have been developed. Literally, it's true. What took me months to literally years of work, I do have in place fairly so within a matter of weeks. This is huge in terms of the dependence upon time for advancement in work. Time is an element that I cannot dismiss. And whether something took me 10 years or took me 2 weeks, it's huge. And this is something that's a part of the research that this organization has done. Initial toxicity studies are available. Serious issues are apparent. Significant mitigation strategies are now available for review. Morgellons Research Project and the Community Health Professional Network are in place as important stepping stones for future and emerging health networks. Geoengineering awareness level is now increased. Scope of application and bioengineering awareness remains woefully deficient. I still believe that's quite the case. Significant intellectual property is available for transfer to the foundation auspices, and key word there is to the foundation. We talk about that tomorrow. I have certain demands and conditions for what I need in the future. We will talk about those. And to my understanding, I am done, and I'm 10 minutes, am I 10 minutes over? Something like that? Anyway, I hope it wasn't too imposing upon you to extend a few minutes. And I thank you very much. And that's all I have for today, and then there's a little session tomorrow on what the future might bear. Thank you very much. Thanks for the invitation to be here. I would like to thank Melissa and Elana especially for making this happen. We probably have close to a year in the cards to get us in this place at this time. So thank you very much. I also wish to thank my wife, Carol. There's things going on behind the scenes all the time that many of us are not aware of, and she's a person that's making things happen also. I'd like to thank all those folks that have been a part of the Nonprofit Institute over the last 20 years in many ways. And they are also the reason that we are here